the title of this talk, it's Beardsley, Wilde, Salome, and Censorship. So we better try and sketch in some background, first of all. As again, those of you who've seen the exhibition will know that there was this mysterious movement called symbolism in the 1890s and the last part of the 19th century, but focused in the 1890s. And symbolism was really the opposite or the parallel movement to Impressionism, which I think we all know about. Impressionism was breaking completely new ground in saying essentially that art was purely visual. There couldn't be any subject matter in art. It was just about light and color, and you did a few trees in a meadow or whatever, and if there were people in it, they were just blobs of color, or there weren't any people and there were just plants and flowers. Like, think of Monet's lily pond paintings, which I'm sure you all can conjure up. And symbolism was a parallel movement which said, well, we want to keep the traditional subjects of art, which came from the Bible, from Greek mythology, and from history. They said, we want to keep those subjects, but they were reinterpreting them in the light of the modern world and in the light of new discoveries about human psychology and science, and in light of the Industrial Revolution and all that had happened since by the late 19th century. So there were these two parallel movements, and they reached a sort of climax in the 1890s. And in Britain, that climax really was focused on these two characters here. Sorry, I'm standing in your way, aren't I? You need to find, one has to find a spot, to stand. It's like, I don't know whether any of you know anything about bullfighting, but in bullfighting, the bull will find a place in the bull ring that it likes, and it won't move from there. And the matadors have to go in and try and get it out. But so I'm finding, it's called in Spanish a querencia. So I'm finding my querencia, which is leaning against this wall. So Oscar Wilde and Aubrey Beardsley were the two figures in the British manifestation of symbolism, this movement, where it was focused, really. And the reason it reached a particular focus, of course, was because of the huge scandal of Wilde's arrest on charges of homosexual behavior in 1895. And he was associated, or Beardsley was associated with him because of these illustrations to Wilde's play Salome, which had been published the year before. And it wrecked Beardsley's career. At that point, he was incredibly famous, although he was very, very young. He was in his early 20s. Wilde was older. But they are these two iconic figures in a nutshell. And their particular, again, in terms of their actual work, it's all focused in this Wilde's play Salome and Beardsley's illustrations for it, which is what we're going to be talking about or looking at. Let's get something else to look at. Okay, there it is. This is not the first edition, but it's the nicest edition. But it also tells us something, which I'll get to in a moment. The play, Wilde wrote, this was published in 1894, the original book with Beardsley's illustrations. But the play itself had already created a scandal because Wilde had tried to have it produced on the London stage with Sarah Bernhardt, the great French actress, in the lead as Salome. And there was a huge row about that because the British censors, probably most of you know that at that time, and until actually, the 1970s, the British theatre was censored by the Lord Chamberlain's office, one of these relics of the monarchy. And the play, the Lord Chamberlain's office forbade the play. The ostensible reason was that it depicted, you weren't supposed to depict characters from the Bible on stage. It was considered to be blasphemous. But they probably, among the other reasons which were not explicitly stated, was the theme of the play, which was at the time quite scandalous, which is, it revolves around King Herod's incestuous lust for his his stepdaughter. And the stepdaughter, Salome's, it's the wrong word, lust for John the Baptist. This will all come out. But the play itself, it's an extraordinary play because it dealt with these issues, fundamental issues of human sexuality in particular, in ways that had just never been dealt with in public in Britain, in British theatre or literature before. So all this was part of the new breaking ground in the psychological content of art, if you like, or the socio-psychological. Okay, Beardsley fully reflected this content in his illustrations, and that caused trouble. The publisher, John Lane, censored some of Beardsley's illustrations. He had some difficulty doing it, because we'll come to that in a moment. But the trouble started, to get to the point, with the actual, even with the cover design. This cover that you see, which was eventually published in 1907 in this very lovely edition. If I don't know whether you can see that it's essentially a pattern based on peacock feathers. And Beardsley, it's not entirely clear why it was rejected by John Lane, but I will suggest some reasons. One is that this here is Beardsley's signature. It's actually not, of course, a signature, it's an emblem. And he got the idea of making his signature into effectively a pictorial device, a picture, from Whistler, and we'll come to Whistler in a minute, but I'll just remind us that one of the themes of the exhibition downstairs is, of course, the influences on all the artists involved, where they got it from, you know. Because if you know anything about the history of art, you'll know that everything comes from something before, even the most outrageous modern art. If you look carefully, you'll find that it comes from things in history. And Beardsley was very influenced by Whistler, among other things, some of the things that are set out downstairs, Japanese art notably, for example. So he's got this enormous signature, and his signature is, I mean, every commentator on Beardsley accepts that he quite deliberately made it very phallic. And here is the name of the author, and here is Beardsley's phallic signature, and it's really rather more prominent. And the background to that, the reason for me suggesting that is that at the point where Beardsley was illustrating the play, he was having a huge row with Wilde, and in particular Wilde's notorious lover, Lord Alfred Douglas, otherwise known as Bosie. And Beardsley was fed up with a lot of them for reasons which I don't think I will be here all afternoon if I go into them, but we can maybe afterwards. So my reading is that Beardsley, in a way, is sticking two fingers up, or sticking one finger up at the lot of them.
It's like a lords and ladies flower.
A lords and ladies flower, yes. Well, yes, there is. Yes, exactly. Thank you. I don't know whether you heard, but I will elaborate on what the lady has just said. All these flowers, they're both flowers and peacock feathers. Beardsley has kind of, adapted them to his purposes, and they're very vulval images as well. You're going to have to put up with this, by the way, because with Beardsley you just can't get away with it. He was very naughty, but he was naughty in a highly artistic way. So it's okay. So essentially this design it bears this phallic device and all these kind of normal things. But, and the other thing about it is it's incredibly lush. It's the whole design, these flowers, if we're going to call them that, they're pushing out, they're growing, and they're sort of, swelling and all that. So anyway, enough of that. The Lane wouldn't have it. So what Beardsley then came up with is this. Now, well, oh, good. Oh. This is an original drawing. It's hard for you. He's made it so it looks as if it's just the book, but and this is actually luckily this wonderful drawing for a cover design is in a British semi-public collection. It's in the Getty Library at that place where the late John Paul Getty used to play cricket and had a big country house. I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, so this is what Beardsley next pronounced, and it's very pure. And and this brings us to something else, which is that although I stressed a moment ago that symbolism was this sort of parallel movement to Impressionism, and of course Impressionism we look upon as being the source of modern art. In fact, there were overlaps, and symbolism was, in the end, part of the development of modern art, the kind of simple, wide white space and all that, which is exactly what you've got here. Beardsley has stripped down the whole thing to this very simple, with the huge amounts of white space, beautiful lettering, which he did. This is a sort of Art Nouveau lettering. And I haven't mentioned so far, but now it's just come up. The specific style that Beardsley was one of the originators of was this style, which is part of symbolism, which is called Art Nouveau. And it was an international movement, and Beardsley is one of its key figures. And all the artists downstairs in the exhibition, all of them in one way or another were contributing to the Art Nouveau style. And it found a particular resonance in this country in book illustration, which again is why that exhibition is there. So he produced this wonderful modernist design. It was intended to be printed on white, probably the stuff that was called parchment board in those days, but they might have also printed some special copies on vellum, on this beautiful parchment stuff. Anyway, Lane didn't like this either, for one reason or another. I mean, not because it was, it does have this sort of diabolical device in the top right corner, which is some of you may be seeing. It's a rose bush. It's a stylized rose bush, basically. But as some of you may be thinking, it's also somehow a sort of face or a mask. But reading it as a rose bush, it's got these amazing sort of wiggling roots, which are kind of the whole thing is slightly sinister, actually. And it's also much more subtle. Well, it's very subtle because, like the human face, it looks symmetrical, but in fact, as I'm sure you all know, is not symmetrical. We are not symmetrical human beings bilaterally. So if you look, it's not quite the same all round. But so anyway, what Lane did was this. This is the actual first edition of Salome. And he just took that device and plonked it in the middle. Beardsley had very subtly put it up off-center and then balanced it with the title and so forth. Lane just plonked it in the middle, and he put it on this very coarse blue cloth, which he bought cheaply in Ireland, I think. It's Irish linen, I think. We know very little factually about all these events around this book, but there's a wonderful letter from Oscar Wilde to John Lane, the publisher, saying, look, please don't do this, because he'd shown them a sample. He said, I hate it, and so does Beardsley. But Lane went ahead. He ignored both his author and his illustrator and went ahead, and this is the result. It's not a very satisfactory book, really, which is why I was saying that the later edition is much better. So if any of you ever come across, if you want to own an early edition of Salome, the green one is the one to go for. Now, the next. And this is the back. He did put Beardsley's signature device on the back, and it's very big, and it's a beautiful example of Beardsley's device. And I think my thought always is that although it was Lane who moved it to the back from the front, in a way you can say, well, it's Beardsley having the last word by having his signature on the back. But that's just a stray thought, really. Now, here it is. No, it was there. I must have skipped over it. Sorry, never mind. So this is the title page. This is the first thing you come to in Beardsley's illustrations. And this is the title page that Beardsley drew. Are those at the back? Are you able to see the detail? And can you all hear me clearly at the back as well? I'm trying to keep my voice up, but sometimes one turns to the screen, But this is what Beardsley drew, and you probably don't need me to point out that this amazing well, it's what's called a herm. It's based on an ancient Greek, god, and it's a hermaphrodite. It's got female breasts and male genitals, and the male genitals are certainly very prominent. And it was too much for Lane, but and also there is this. The whole thing is blasphemous, It's a pagan idol being worshipped by an angel with a very prominent penis, very delicately drawn, but nevertheless, And there are these.
It looks like his signature as well.
Which looks like his signature? Oh yes, his signature is there. Well spotted.
The shape looks like his signature.
Yes,
as well as a bit at the bottom.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Do
you know, this is no one has ever pointed this out before, and I have never noticed, so thank you. But this wonderful lady at the front here has just pointed out that, well, first of all, this is Beardsley's signature device here, and it's a slightly even more phallic version than the one that we saw a few minutes ago. I can see you peering about. It's in your leaflet, in your booklet, if you've got it, I hope. But what had never struck me before is that Beardsley put these two giant candles, which again are parodies of altar candles in a Christian church. But the two candles and the figure emerging out of between them echoes. It echoes visually his signature device. Thank you so much. You have contributed to Beardsley scholarship. No, I mean it. I really mean it. And what you probably can't quite see, all of you, but again, you can see if those in the leaflet, the breasts, the nipples are eyes with fringed eyelashes. And anyway, the whole thing is just amazing. And Lane just jibbed at it. We know from his later memoirs of his publishing career in the 1890s that he used to, as Beardsley's drawings arrived in the publisher's office, he gave them to his friends, and he examined them with a magnifying glass, and he gave them to his friends to look at and see if they could see anything naughty. And but so this is what was published, and you can see that the offending bits have been removed, and what. The,
The angel
now,
still looks like Medusa.
the original,
The angel looks like Medusa as well.
the angel looks like Medusa, right? You know, the one with snaky hair. Beardsley loved the image, the traditional image of Medusa, the killer, the femme fatale, you know, the woman who turned you to stone, with snake hair. And he uses Medusa-like hair a lot. I mean, they're not literally snakes, but they're it's all very the hair is very serpentine. This just brings us to, we'll reserve that. So that's what appeared in the book, and it's one of the reasons why it's unsatisfactory, because they had these censored images which are just daft in a way. Now, what Beardsley, this is, we think, this is the drawing that Beardsley made instead of what appears, but but what happened was that the original, for the published title page, they didn't alter the original drawing. They took a photograph of it, made a print, will come up, and then took the genitals off the print and re-photographed it and made the printing block from that. Now, one of the themes, just very briefly, just remind us that one of the themes of this exhibition is the use of the line block process for reproducing these drawings by Beardsley and the others. I'm not going to go into it here because it's all downstairs, but it did enable them to do these sort of things, like to change an image, alter it, censor it in this case, without having to mutilate the original drawing. But we'll see. Anyway, let's move on rapidly. So but Beardsley does seem to have done a new drawing for the title page, which is this. But in the book, they decided having to use the original mutilated, and this then became the page with the list of pictures, which is what would have gone in the blank space. And Beardsley's he's been very naughty again, but in a much more subtle way, which Lane didn't get. And Salome, the female figure is Salome, and she's cocking her hip at the viewer and glancing over her shoulder with an expression which, again, you may not be able to see from the back, but is, I think the word is lascivious, or come hither. And she's got this ridiculous hair made up of roses. And in the foreground, the angel of the previous one has been turned into again, a hermaphroditic fawn, whose finger, you look at the finger, and then, hang on. Oh, yes, look, the angel's penis there, and then the finger there. It's, you can see Beardsley is playing games, you know. So, moving rapidly on, this is the title page, the frontispiece to the book. And this is I don't know how well you all know the play, but I'll try. At the beginning of the play, the play is set on the terrace, the outdoor terrace of Herod's palace. And at the beginning, there are these two characters on stage. One is the one on the right, who is the captain of Herod's guard, and he's called the Syrian captain. And the naked boy is the page boy of Herodias, the queen. So they're on the terrace and they're looking at the moon. The whole thing is bathed in moonlight. This was very sort of important. And they're looking at the moon. And the moon has a face, which we all, as children, we all know about, learn about the man in the moon, and you can see a face on the moon at certain. Anyway, but it's a caricature of Oscar Wilde, and as we'll see, Beardsley caricatured Wilde in a number of these illustrations. Exactly why he did, I mean, he was fed up with them, as I said before, but they're not actually unkind. And my own view is that the most interesting thing one can say about these caricatures of Wilde is that it's part of Beardsley's extraordinary originality and the extraordinary way in which he breaks rules, that he put the author into the illustrations. No one that I know of no illustrated book where that happens, that I can think of. I've tried thinking about it, but anyway, so there's this caricature of Wilde. We do not know what Wilde thought about them. There is absolutely no record, which is rather a disaster from the historian's point of view. But the other thing to say before we move rapidly on is that this frontispiece is one of the most beautiful of all Beardsley's drawings, and it's again this thing that I was talking about when we looked at the cover design, the second cover design. It has this extraordinary expanse of white space, and then the whole thing is built on white space set off by flat blocks of black, and then these amazing flowing lines. And this drawings by Beardsley like this had a major effect. They were very, very, very influential. In Britain, the whole Glasgow school, Mackintosh and all that, came out of these Beardsley drawings because they discovered them when they were published, not this one actually, but when earlier drawings by him were published in the Studio magazine when it emerged, it appeared in 1893. But anyway, it is a wonderful thing. There's lots more we could say about it, but we will be here all afternoon if we do. So what then happens is that Salome appears, and at the opening of the play, it's the moment when Herod has imprisoned John the Baptist. This is all very appropriate at Easter. And in Wilde's stage setting, the Baptist is imprisoned in a well, which is on the terrace, which has a big lid on it. So it's a disused well. It's a holding tank for water. It's called a cistern. So the Baptist has been imprisoned in this empty cistern. Salome has heard about this mysterious John the Baptist, and she wants to see him. She's a young woman, and she's curious. And so here she comes on, and the guy she's talking to is the Syrian captain. He's got more clothes on this time, or different clothes. And she is he's in charge of the guard, and therefore of guarding the Baptist. And she's trying to persuade him to let her see the Baptist, to bring him out of his prison and let her see him. And she does so. He's resistant. He doesn't want to do it because he knows it's going to be big trouble, you know. And she uses all her feminine wiles on him to persuade him to do this. And Beardsley this drawing is called the Peacock Skirt. The drawings all have titles which were probably developed by Beardsley and John Lane, and possibly even Wilde together, but I think we accept that they're kind of Beardsley's titles. Anyway, this is called the Peacock Skirt. We will come back to the peacocks in a minute, but everything about her is peacock-like. There's a peacock image at the top left with the neck of the peacock, and Salome herself, her whole figure, you know, has been reduced to this kind of tapering, swollen form, she's both like a peacock neck and head with the tail of her skirt being her skirt. And as many commentators, not just me, have pointed out, the whole image of Salome is phallic. Anyway, the Syrian captain he's completely entranced by her, and eventually he's persuaded to bring the Baptist out. So, and we'll come back. So, and I just wanted to show you the source of Beardsley's fascination with peacocks on a visual level, which was Whistler's famous Peacock Room, which was in London in the house of a man called Frederick Leyland, and which Whistler decorated in the early 1870s. And it's from this astonishing decorative scheme that the whole thing of peacock feathers became, you know, central to the new decorative movement, or movement in design and decoration, called the aesthetic movement in the 1880s, which was all part of this symbolism, Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau came out of the aesthetic movement. So this, and Whistler in turn had been looking at Japanese art, and so had Beardsley, and it all just sort of came together. But the other, okay, so John the Baptist is produced out of his underground prison, and this is the confrontation between Salome and the Baptist, which is a key moment, early moment in the play. She makes advance. She finds him fascinating, and she falls in lust with him. You know, she wants him, and he rejects her. You can see all this, and that she's leaning into him. Her breasts are naked, and he's kind of cringing back. His head, all that. And Salome is this astonishing figure with this incredible headdress with these spiky forms, and her clothes, her navel is exposed, which is very modern. You can walk down Oxford Street on a hot day, and every young women will pass you looking like this, more or less. And there's more of and there are butterflies, which again came from Whistler partly, Whistler's famous butterfly signature, which in turn gave rise to Beardsley's own emblem. It's all rolled up. But so there's this central confrontation. And the whole subject of Salome as a subject for literature and art had been very much in the air through the 19th century, in French literature particularly, and picked up in French art. And
Oscar Wilde's play was originally written in French.
Yes, oh yes, thank you, yes. Wilde's play, Salome, was originally written in French, which is one reason why there was this massive row when Beardsley was doing the illustrations, because he got his boyfriend Bosie to translate it, and Bosie made a hash of it, and then Beardsley offered to translate it, and apparently Bosie jealously rejected Beardsley's translation, although Beardsley spoke perfect French and also knew the theatre very well. You see, you've diverted me, Geoffrey. If we run over time, it's his fault. But the downstairs in the exhibition is this, or rather a photograph of it. It's a drawing by the great French symbolist artist, Gustave Moreau. Moreau is the king of the French symbolists, which means really he's the king of all the symbolists, because it was a very French movement, but not exclusively so. So this, and in the early 1870s, Moreau became fascinated by the story of Salome, and he made a whole group of paintings and drawings of Salome doing her famous dance, which we'll get to in a minute, and then taking possession of the head of John the Baptist. Geoffrey and I chose for the exhibition this particular drawing, and if we go back, it's the image of Salome on the right here is really it just echoes the Gustave Moreau in the fantastic costume, the incredible sort of jewels, the headdress, and all the rest of it. So Moreau, we'll come back to Moreau, but he again, one of the major themes of the exhibition downstairs is, the way in which these artists looked elsewhere, and they were blending influences from all around. So Moreau is part of that. Now, you won't be surprised to learn that image of John and Salome was also rejected by Lane. Nobody really understands quite what he objected to, but you can sort of see the naked breasts, the aggressiveness of the female image in it. And so Beardsley substituted for it this. And again, as before, he's continued to be naughty, but in a much, much, much more subtle way. I think it's a very beautiful drawing, and it appears to have absolutely nothing to do with the play. And Beardsley very famously, in a letter about all this, said that he'd substituted, for the ones Lane objected to, he'd substituted drawings which were simply beautiful and quite irrelevant. Which is only true up to a point, but this is certainly simply beautiful, and in a way it is irrelevant. The costume is bizarre. It's very Japanese, I think, looking, the main naughtiness, really, in a way, is that it's provocative on the level of showing a completely absurd piece of fashion, perhaps. But there are other little touches like the navel, which you see, and the hand, which Beardsley's hands are always worth looking at. I think he's quite deliberately, again, made a suggestion of the female pubic area, or a vulval image. But you can take that or leave it as you wish. Now, I'm running through the drawings, the illustrations in the play. This shows a scene. Beardsley here is illustrating a scene which does not appear in the play, although it's suggested. What has happened is that the Syrian, the page boy that we saw at the beginning, Herodias's page boy, whom we saw, and here he is again. This is him. He was, as I have not so far mentioned, he was in love with the Syrian captain, the captain of the guard. And the problem being that the captain of the guard, having fallen in love with Salome and done her bidding and brought out the Baptist, he then had to witness Salome trying to seduce John the Baptist, who firmly, as I told you, rejected her. And the captain of the guard was so mortified by Salome's wooing of the Baptist that he killed himself. He does this on stage. He falls on his sword. And this is the page boy mourning him. And again, it's a very, very beautiful drawing, and with the huge amounts of white space set off by these very carefully placed blocks of black, and all sorts of things going on. But I will just point out, first of all, there's another of the caricatures of Wilde. And I think if you read his expression, he looks sad. I think that one of the things one might also say about these caricatures of Wilde in these illustrations is that they actually, the expression on the author's face echoes what's going on or refers to what's going on in the drawing, as it were, in the scene. It's just a suggestion. Here is a rose falling off the rose bush, and a falling flower, which is an emblem of the ending of life. Also, this is a bit more tenuous, but if you look at the top of the 3 prongs of the trellis up which the rose is growing, you'll see that the one in the middle is tallest, and the one on the left is a bit shorter, and the one on the right is a bit longer. And then there's that tendril going across them, but not quite touching the one on the right. And what some commentators have seen there is that it could be seen as representing the top of a broken column. And a broken column, a deliberately broken column, is a monument. You know, it's a death monument. It's a symbol of death. So he might, and you find it in classical monuments and things, but he might be doing that deliberately. Okay, let's move on. Where are we? Aha. Now, the next thing that happens in the play is that Herodias appears from inside the palace. She comes out onto the terrace. And Beardsley has really gone to town on this one. He shows Herodias as this extraordinary kind of matriarch. And with her page boy, who is wearing a fig leaf. We'll come back to that in a second. In the lower right corner is another of the caricatures of Wilde. This time, he is he's holding, the book he's holding, you can see is letter, it has the title Salome. So he's acting as a kind of impresario. He's introduced, it's an incredible weaving of the play. You know, Beardsley is representing the author. The play is in an illustration of the play. He shows the author introducing the characters, and they are plausibly on a stage. And Wilde is kind of, you know, the MC, if you like. I said impresario, but he's introducing the whole thing. And the 3 candles you could read as, you know, stage lights. What are they called? Footlights.
Signature again.
Mm-hmm.
The signature again as well.
The signature again, yes. Yes, the parallel, the signature is there, but also the candles echo the signature. Yeah, it's very interesting, this.
Yeah, in the shapes.
Yes. And as you probably have also noticed, the candlesticks themselves, the 2 outer ones, are phallic, very clearly phallic. And John Lane missed those. He missed it, but what he did not miss was that. This is the original drawing. And what we just saw with the fig leaf was what got into the book. And the original drawing for this is in the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And they acquired it some years ago, and it had the fig leaf on it. And they then got in a huge tears because they thought, oh my God, we haven't got the original drawing, because we knew that this is what it looked like. But they did have the original, because what happened was that, in fact, we're slightly out of chronology, but in fact, when Lane objected to the prominent genitalia of the page boy, while missing, of course, the phallic candlesticks, Beardsley took the original drawing and he scraped them out. He worked on very strong Whatman paper, and he took a scalpel and he just delicately scraped them off. And he drew, just to go back and remind us, he drew on the fig leaf with a little bow. So of course, you know, it draws your attention to the whole thing. Again, he wasn't going to let Lane totally get away with it, you know. he also he drew on a little bit, but luckily the drawing had been photographed before Beardsley altered it, so that's how we know what it looked like. And a block was made from the photograph, and 1 or 2 prints were taken. And Beardsley sent one of them, that is in a museum collection, Beardsley sent to a friend of his with a little verse written on it, which goes, "Because one figure was undressed, this little drawing was suppressed. It was unkind, but never mind, perhaps it all was for the best." Beardsley was quite a good poet, but that wasn't perhaps one of his better efforts, but it's quite amusing. Anyway, I tell you the story. So the play then progresses to the scene where Herod's lust for his stepdaughter is established. And this, Beardsley called this drawing the eyes of Herod. And in the play, there is this whole scene where Herodias notices, that her husband is looking at her daughter, and she ticks him off about it all the time. She says, "You're always looking at her. I won't try." So, but that establishes this relationship, as it were, not relationship, but Herod's lust, as I said. And Beardsley has echoed that lust, I think, in, again, these sort of phallic candles and the 2 cupids, holding the great candelabra. And there's a peacock, of course. The peacock is a symbol of male pride and male virility anyway, as I have not so far quite mentioned. And there is Salome looking very seductive. Yes, they are in the wrong order. So then Salome, then the scene then occurs where Herod begs Salome to do the dance of the 7 veils for him, and she eventually agrees. Because he offers her famously, anything, even unto half my kingdom, and she says, "Really? Anything?" And he says, "Yes." And she said, "You swear it?" And he says, "I swear it." And Salome then goes off and prepares for her dance. And this is, again, you don't see this in the play, but the first drawing Beardsley did, it's called the Toilette of Salome, is this. So this is his first drawing, showing her being quite, with a Pierrot hairdresser, she's, again, there are all sorts of things going on in this drawing, which Lane could have objected to. It's not clear which of them or all of them. But look at the shape of Salome's breast there, and then it's echoed in the skirt of the Pierrot. The boy sitting on the stool, naked boy, has pubic hair, which was an absolute no-no in European art at that time. I mean, in fact, it has been since the Renaissance, really, with 1 or 2 little exceptions. Anyway, that was a problem too, I think. And also, if you follow the glance, first of all, I don't know whether you can see his eyes, but they're sort of hooded and they've got dark shadows under them, It's a very, very sultry expression that he's got on his face. And he's looking directly at the page boy here. And then there are the books. The book, most prominently, you see there, I don't know whether you can read again, Zola, La Terre. Now, Zola's realist novels, which were incredibly blunt, had recently been translated into English, and the poor publisher, who was a man called Visitelli, was prosecuted, and in fact eventually ruined by his desire to publish Zola for English audiences. They were considered to be pornographic, Zola's books. And La Terre was one of the ones that caused the most scandal in Britain. So Beardsley's being naughty with the books. He's also included there Les Fleurs du Mal, Baudelaire's, again, notorious book of poems, which was prosecuted when it was first published, and had to be I think about 15 of the poems had to be removed from it for it to be allowed to be published. So all that. So this, Lane completely rejected this, I mean, outright. And this is what Beardsley did instead, just to go back. Again, as we've been seeing, you're beginning to see the pattern. He's cleaned it up, no end. But he's cleaned it up, interestingly, again, not just in terms of the naughtinesses. He's cleaned it up visually. And in terms of art, purely visual terms, it's much less cluttered, it's much purer. To a modernist eye, it's much, much more satisfactory. And it's very, very beautiful. And Beardsley has really confined himself in, retaining a little dig at Lane and all the rest of it. He's confined himself to the books. So we still have Zola, and this time another of his most scandalous books, Nana. I think it is Nana, isn't it? Anyway. And then a book which just says the Marquis de Sade. Manon Lescaut, a French novel that at the time was considered very scandalous. It's very mild to us now. And then a notorious classical ancient Roman book, The Golden Ass, which was also considered kind of naughty book at the time. So, and I just will add, if any of you are interested in the history of furniture, the key furniture designer in Britain in the aesthetic movement, the kind of before Art Nouveau, was William Godwin, a marvelous, marvelous designer. And both the dressing table and the chair she's sitting in essentially it's Godwin furniture. It's Beardsley almost parodying Godwin furniture because it was very spindly, He's made it even thinner and exaggerated it, but it's Godwin furniture. So there are all these things. So onwards, we've done that. And then the great moment comes of Salome's dance. It's always struck me as being a very peculiar image of the dance of the Seven Veils, not at all the way one imagines, but that's partly Beardsley's originality, I think. He's shown the veils sort of spilling out from between her thighs. And again, you could read the one coming up into the and expelling or linking on to the spiral of roses. You could read that again phallically. This one got through Lane's censorship, but he missed something which may or may not seem obvious. Again, it's not fair to ask you to look, because most of you are too far away probably. But it's the musician. I don't know whether you can all see, but Beardsley is quite cleverly hidden, but not hidden that much. Again, the musician's phallus here.
His tongue. The musician's tongue.
A tongue? Oh, the musician's tongue, yes. His tongue's hanging out. No, the musician is slobbering with lust for Salome. So he's a kind of displaced, you don't see Herod, who is also slobbering with lust, of course. That's been displaced onto the musician. Right. And then, of course, Salome asks Herod for the head of John the Baptist as her reward. And of course, it's the last thing Herod had never crossed his mind that she would ask for that.
Why did she ask it?
Why did she want the head?
Ah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, she asked for the head of the Baptist because he'd rejected her, as I did mention earlier. He rejected her advances, and she didn't like that. But Wilde, and this is a key aspect of Wilde's play, which made it different from all the other reworkings of the story of Salome that I mentioned had occurred through the 19th century. Because the key difference in Wilde is that he imagined, in the Bible, just to remind us, in the Bible, it's Salome's mother, Herodias, who asks for the head of the Baptist, or tells her daughter to ask that, because the Baptist has insulted her, Herodias, the mother. And Wilde displaces that whole thing onto Salome herself and twists it so that the motive for Salome to ask for the head is her thwarted lust for the Baptist. He's turned her down, and she's not having it. And so she wants his head, and and she wants it so that she can kiss it, so she can give it the kiss that he refused her in that initial confrontation at the beginning of the play. And this is the moment when the executioner brings her the head of the Baptist. And remember, I stressed that the prison was underground. It's in this tank. So, and it's in all the productions of Salome, it's set in the stage. And so, and the executioner goes down into the prison to chop off his head, although how quite you do it in that confined space. Anyway, never mind the play. But Beardsley has imagined the hand appearing, out of the system with the head on the plate. And then the extraordinary thing, about this is her expression, which is sort of an expression, I think, of incredulity that her fantastic desire has been fulfilled, and she's dipping a finger in the blood. And what's she going to do? I just think one's immediate thought is she's going to taste it. So she gets the head, and then the play moves to its climax when she grasps it and kisses it, and she cries in triumph, "I have kissed your mouth, Yochanan." That's the name of the Baptist in the play. "I have kissed your mouth, Yochanan. I have kissed your mouth." And Beardsley imagined her floating in space with it. It's an extraordinary image. It's not totally original. He got the idea from somewhere else, but I'll come to in a second. But what I wanted to do was just to read you. So, and she goes through. This is a very long scene where Salome has this long monologue with the head. It's one of the most extraordinary scenes in English theatre, really. And first of all, she expresses triumph, so that he can no longer reject her advances. "Ah, thou wouldst not suffer me to kiss thy mouth, Yochanan. Well, I will kiss it now. I will bite it with my teeth as one bites a ripe fruit. Yes, I will kiss thy mouth, Yochanan." And then she does so. And it goes on, "Thou didst treat me as a harlot, as a wanton, me, Salome, daughter of Herodias, princess of Judea. Well, Yochanan, I still live, but thou art dead, and thy head belongs to me." But then she changes her mood, and she gets maudlin, really. "Ah, Yochanan, Yochanan, thou wert the only man that I have loved. Thy body was a column of ivory, set in a silver socket. It was a garden full of doves and of silver lilies. It was a tower of silver decked with shields of ivory. And then finally she changes mood again and she realizes the horror of what she's done. She's killed the man she loved. What shall I do now, Yochanan? Neither the floods nor the great waters can quench my passion. And what then happens is that she repeats her great cry, I have kissed thy mouth, Yochanan. And Herod, who is all the time watching this performance of hers with horror, increasing horror, he's finally totally disgusted. And he issues the order to his guards, kill that woman. And then the play ends with one of the rare stage directions in the play. The soldiers rush forward and crush beneath their shields Salome, daughter of Herodias, princess of Judea, curtain. That actually might be a good place to end, but I did. It'll be an anticlimax. This is one of those paintings I mentioned by Gustave Moreau, the drawing downstairs, and it was Moreau who invented the idea of the Baptist's head floating in space, dripping blood. And there is his image of Salome. It's a marvelous painting, but again, as I said, the theme of the exhibition is just to show how all these ideas bounced around. And artists, Picasso famously said, mediocre artists borrow, great artists steal, and they from other artists. So we have ended. Questions? Lights?
Just have some light.
Yeah. I'm happy to.
It's not a popular play, is it now, that's performed compared to other Wilde plays?
Another very pertinent question here. You probably didn't all hear it. The gentleman here just pointed out that Salome is not a very popular play compared with Wilde's other plays. Well, now, first of all, of course, it's true that it's not that. It is performed a lot, but not that. I mean, I can't remember the last major production in London, in the London theatre. But of course, what happened?
National 2 years ago?
Was there one? Yes, there might have been. I don't think I. Yes. People, the modern producers mess around with them, of course.
Strauss did this as an opera.
The opera, yes. I was about to get. Very soon after the play was published, Richard Strauss turned it into an opera, about 1905, I think. And since its first production, it's hardly been off the stage somewhere in the world. And it's the opera that really made the play famous. It is, of course, hugely operatic. And again, until relative, I mean, as you probably are all aware, Wilde's reputation, indeed Beardsley's, this whole phenomenon, Wilde's disgrace and imprisonment brought the whole thing crashing to the ground. It crashed and burned this ferment of innovative art and literature, and that was also being deliberately provocative of quote-unquote Victorian values, and particularly in relation to matters sexual. They were much more relaxed about death, It's the other way around now. But the play, nobody really knew what to make of Wilde, and of particularly a play like Salome, but also of his novel Dorian Gray, which was also seen as a kind of odd thing. The one thing, again, this gentleman I think had in mind, the one thing that did survive was Wilde's great comedy, The Importance of Being Earnest. And The Importance of Being Earnest, in a way, it's the great comedy to the great tragedy of Salome in Wilde's oeuvre. But the fact is also that in The Importance of Being Earnest, Wilde wrote what I think everybody nowadays agrees is the most perfect comedy in English theatre. And one of the reasons it's so perfect, apart from its structure and the way it works in a technical manner, if you like, one of the reasons is that if you go to The Importance of Being Earnest today, all the jokes work, all these social jokes, these jokes about society and about marriage and about relationships, and it all still works because it's all true. You know, it remains true. Wilde pinned down some of the eternal verities of human society and of the whole. Anyway, and you know, it's hysterically funny, and I never tire of it, I must say. Yes.
Did Aubrey Beardsley illustrate anything else of Wilde's, or was it just Salome?
It was just Salome. It's a very interesting question, actually, and I don't want to bore on. It's rather a specialised matter, but no, he only illustrated, and Wilde's early books were either decorated or, in just 2 cases, illustrated as well by an artist called Charles Ricketts. And Ricketts, I think, should have got the job of Salome, or he certainly thought so. But actually, Wilde had met Beardsley, and Beardsley had read Salome before it was published. And he had immediately made a drawing, which I didn't show you, but it actually is an early version of Salome holding the head of the Baptist and triumphantly crying out that she's kissed it. The drawing is called, as Geoffrey reminded us, the play was written in French, so the original phrase is J'ai baisé ta bouche, Yochanan, and that's what's written on Beardsley's original drawing. Wilde saw it at some point and seems to have said, right, I want this man to illustrate the book. And we know that, we're fairly sure that it was Wilde who wanted Beardsley, because there is a letter from John Lane, the publisher, to Wilde, saying, I have today seen Beardsley and commissioned him to make these drawings. And I think he was writing to Wilde to tell him that he'd done what Wilde had told him to do. I think that's probably the case. So yeah, but the Ricketts books, anyway, never mind, yes.
I just wonder how on earth it was, financially viable, because they only produced 500 copies, didn't they?
Ah.
I mean, the economics of it seems to make no sense.
You might well ask. This is more Geoffrey's department than mine, but first of all, the first edition, the one I showed you with the cover that Beardsley and Wilde hated, what they did was they made, there were 2 issues. There were, 2 printings, if you're not print. Anyway, the book was published in 2 versions. There were 2 versions. One was the so-called ordinary, of which there were probably about 1,000. I don't think I'd have to look it up, but because there is a book that tells you these things. I think the ordinary edition was it 10 shillings? But at that time, £1 was about £100 today if you add inflation. And so it would have been a £50 book. But then there were 100 copies, so-called large paper. They were bigger, and the paper was better paper, and the cover was posher cloth. In the case of Salome, it was silk. It was silk, which of course was silly because I've never seen a copy where the silk hadn't, faded and or torn or whatever, And those were priced at about 2 guineas or something, which is 200 quid, So, and there was a market for them. Again, this is Jeffrey's department really, but there was an act of Parliament, which an Education Act, which increased literacy hugely in the late 19th century, and it expanded the market for books.
And also the photographic reproduction.
And the photographic reproduction process that I briefly mentioned, but again is explained downstairs. And so there was a huge market for books, which of course at one end it was a popular, cheap market, but at the other end, it was, in a nutshell, the answer to your question is that the market could sustain a luxury end, and it did, with books priced at about this sort of range of 10 shillings, which would be £50, up to £2 or 2 guineas, which would be about 200. That kind of range of, and they were beautiful objects, and we're still collecting them. You know, I mean, a first edition of Salome, even though it's such an unsatisfactory book, will cost you, from a rare book dealer, anywhere between £2,000 and £5,000. You know, depending on its condition, you know, and so forth.
What was it that actually appealed to Beardsley with regard to the Japanese black or Japanese line?
The question was, what was it that appealed to Beardsley about Japanese art, basically? Golly, how long have we got? Well, the quick answer is that, again, all this is explained downstairs, but the Japanese prints, when they started arriving in Britain in the late 1850s, early 1860s, after trade with Japan was forcibly reopened by the Americans with a gunboat, basically, these prints started arriving, and European artists were gobsmacked by them because they did not use perspective. All of European art since the Renaissance, when it was rediscovered, were based on the system of perspective, one-point perspective, to create the illusion of 3 dimensions in a picture on a 2-dimensional surface. And the Japanese had developed a way of making vivid, realistic images without it, but with just using line and flat areas of color, including black, but they used bright color because they developed this system of woodblock printing, unbelievably technically accomplished and complex, where you had a separate block for every color, and then you printed them, you had to line them up, print them.
This appealed to William Heath Robinson.
Well, yes, Heath Robinson was, you know, all this was, again, the theme of the exhibition is that all these influences from Japanese art, from key artists like Beardsley, they all filtered out, and Heath Robinson was one of the first to pick up. And his early work, which there are very good, very, very fine examples of in the exhibition, they're right, in a way, they're at the end of the exhibition, they're right on the right of the door as you go in, and the normal way to go around would be to turn left through the door and work your way around. Why did you put them at the end, Jeffrey?
I wanted them facing the Beardsleys.
Oh, yes. Arcane curatorial reasons, right? But there are some perfect examples of Heath Robinson's early work, which picks up on Beardsley, but is entirely individual as well. Right, I think I better shut up.
Also, Simon, it's worth mentioning that Beardsley himself was influenced by both Ricketts and by Anning Bell.
Yes, it's all, artists pick, when they're developing, you know, they pick stuff up from all over. But yes, there was, Charles Ricketts started working on Wilde's books, the earliest of them, before Beardsley really gets going. And Beardsley knew about him, of course, you know, knew his work. And an artist called Anning Bell, who's also in the exhibition, who was a slightly older artist.
He published a number of drawings in something called Sylvia's Journal, which it's alleged influenced Beardsley.
He published a number of drawings?
In Sylvia's Journal, which is quite an obscure publication.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
it includes Isabella on the pot of basil, and it shows Isabella holding up the head of her lover.
Oh, yes, that's right. And where was that again?
Sylvia's Journal.
Sylvia's Journal.
Yeah.
When?
About 1891 or 2.
Yes. So there is the drawing. That drawing's not
in the Ibis Journal.
Oh, in the exhibition.
Well, in
It's
the
not.
shop.
Yeah. In the shop.
We don't have it in the exhibition. No one knows where it is.
Oh.
There's only one known copy of the journal, which is in the Bodleian, falling to bits.
Oh. So what is it you've got in the shop?
The Ibis Journal, which
Oh, the Ibis Journal. Oh, yeah. And
Bell.
oh, yes. Okay. So yes. Sorry, this is an arcane bit of art history. But anyway, there was this drawing by this artist, Anning Bell, of someone holding the head of
I can't remember his name, but the lover of
Isabella.
in the poem.
Yes, Isabella and the Pot of Basil. Keats' poem. Anyway, I think we better stop. But I'll be around if anyone.
It's been a most wonderful talk. Thank you
Oh,
very much.
thank you. Well.